The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We'll explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they were previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Keith Wright, Assemblyman for the great District of Harlem. How you doing, Keith?
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for having me once again.
That's good. Well, this is a very important time in politics. A lot of elections. There's a think there's going to be a change in the balance of power. But particularly in New York State, what are the key races and what is going to be the anticipated result?
Well, actually, we're on the onset of a very exciting time, politically speaking, electorally speaking, if you will. This coming election day, which will be in about a week or two, we have a new race. We're about to have a new governor, a brand new lieutenant governor in the state of New York. And those of us that know, we have not had a new governor in the state of New York in over 12 years.
And before that, we didn't have one for another 12 years.
And before that, we didn't have. So we're seeing a balance of power, a power shift, if you will.
Well, it's Republican, Pataki,
right.
Cuomo, Democrat.
That's right.
Now we have Eliot Spitzer.
Eliot Spitzer, who can be probably defined as, he's definitely a Democrat, but certainly he takes some views that are sometimes a little bit more conservative, let's say, than some of the other Democrats, and certainly more to the left than certainly Republican. So
you use that word conservative, and it's almost a pejorative term. What is a political conservative?
Well, and when I talk about Eliot Spitzer in terms of maybe having some conservative views, I would say on some criminal justice issues, he might be considered a bit conservative. As juxtaposed to me, he is in favor of the death penalty. I am not in favor of the death penalty. In actuality, I'm the author of the bill to eliminate the death penalty here in New York.
Well, most Americans and most New Yorkers are against the death penalty, yet there always seems to be some political repercussion when someone comes out aggressively as an elected official and advocates against the death penalty. The allegation is that person is soft on crime, yet we know, the statistics show that the death penalty does not mute crime.
Oh, it definitely does not.
It's
It's an emotional issue, and some elected officials do try and play on people's emotions in terms of advocating for the death penalty. I'm not saying Eliot Spitzer is trying to do that, because I think he actually firmly believes in the death penalty. But certainly it's an issue that some folks, it has been shown empirically that death penalty has nothing to do with killing someone. No one thinks twice about shooting someone because there's a death penalty. Usually you have someone, murders are committed purely because of emotions.
And most of them are people who know each other.
That know each other, certainly. So,
well, that's one conservative issue. Now, give me another one.
Well, certainly there might be some in terms of determinate sentencing for folks that are sentenced to crimes. We just went through a whole big thing with Governor George Pataki regarding trying to soften, if you will, the Rockefeller drug laws. And we've been pushing for judicial discretion. Rockefeller drug laws have absolutely no judicial discretion whatsoever. Judges are merely robots, if you will. They have to rule on the statute, and there is no discretion. I know, certainly a lot of other folks know that the backlog in our cases in our criminal justice system, if it were not for judicial discretion, it would be even more of a backlog than we have right now. And certainly with judicial discretion, you can play a better role in people's lives. People don't have to be scarred for life because of the criminal justice system.
Well, why would that become a conservative position? What is the philosophy behind that?
Well,
Punitive?
certainly if you have folks that are advocating for determinant sentencing, that that fills your jails up. You have a lock 'em up, throw away the key sort of mentality, if you will. And for crimes that don't hurt anyone, folks are thrown in jail. And as we all know, jails are not part of a rehabilitative process. Jails actually add to the criminal justice process and becomes a vicious cycle that no one can seem to break out of.
No, the United States of America has many places have the death penalty, many states. We have more people in jail, particularly black males, than we have in college.
No question.
What is it in our country's psyche that makes us think that if we lock up people, particularly poor people and people of color, that the society is going to be better?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I personally think that jails are vestiges of slavery, if you will, and that you have folks of color that I mean, if you just, it's part of America's problem, if you will. If you just lock them up, you don't have to look at the racism that's been perpetuated in this country for many, many years. This country was built on racism. But for racism, but for slavery, this country would not have been built. So I just think it's
at least built the way it was.
And built the way it was. And it's a further perpetuation of just, I guess, hiding your problem.
Okay, we've explored conservative philosophy. Now let's go back to the
question
upcoming elections. What are the chances? What are the issues?
Well, it's interesting. Certainly, we will have a Democratic governor, Democratic lieutenant governor. Hillary Clinton will be elected again. It looks like Andrew Cuomo will be elected as the state's attorney general. Jeanine Pirro seems to be, I guess, deflating as we look, as we speak. And we have Mr. Hevesy, Alan Hevesy, who looks like he too will be reelected.
Although it looks like he might be a lodestone on the campaign because of the recent revelations about his use of the driver. Some Republicans and many Democrats, or I should say some Democrats, are saying he should pull out from the ticket, or if he does get elected, he should resign.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I do think he probably goes through Election Day and does get reelected. I happened to see a debate between the first debate that Mr. Hevesy had with his opponent, whose name I didn't even know before they debated last night, a guy by the name of Callahan, I think his name was. And Mr. Hevesy was, I mean, cleaned his clock. Alan is, and I've known Alan for over 30 years. Alan is probably one of the smartest men that I've ever met.
Well, of course, people say, if he's so smart, why didn't he
Well,
pay
you know,
the
I mean,
chauffeur?
I think he made an unfortunate and he made a bad mistake in terms of, especially in his position as state comptroller.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be the #1 bean counter and be responsible for taxpayer money. I think he made a horrible, horrible mistake. I don't think it's something that should really scar him for life, because I think he's had a good tenure as a comptroller, New York City comptroller, and as a state comptroller. I do think he will probably incur some problems, especially after the election. I know that Joe Bruno, the Senate Majority Leader, has called for his resignation. Now, if that happens, if Mr. Hevesy decides to step down, it would be the responsibility of the New York State Legislature, the Assembly in particular, to choose the next state comptroller. Now, there is history to that. The state legislature, the Assembly, chose Carl McCall back in 1994 when Ned Reagan, a Republican, decided to step down as the New York State comptroller, because he was state comptroller for about 12 years before that. Some of the names that we've heard to take over for Mr. Hevesy might be a guy by the name of Bill Thompson, the current New York City comptroller. I've heard the name Bill Mulrow, who actually ran for New York State comptroller back in 2000, I believe. So these are some of the names, but you know, I think Mr. Hevesy will probably withstand this storm, if you will. I mean, he clearly was head and shoulders above his opponent, who I think is a Saratoga County comptroller,
treasurer,
your
whatever.
treasurer, what have you.
But actually, the Hevesy situation points up the volatility of politics around real issues, perceived real issues, and non-issues, which leads me to ask, what are the key issues in New York State that are reflected in this election and will be followed up with whoever gets elected?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Roscoe, and that's a great question. The key issues, I mean, certainly New York is not immune to the issues of any other state in a lot of ways. The war in Iraq is a big, big issue. But you know what? People are tired of not working. People are tired of not having their children educated. People just want to take care of bread and butter issues.
But you said not working. I read a statistic the other day that New York State unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in 15 years.
Yeah, and that could very well be true. But
that's the ones who got counted. There are a lot of people who stopped looking for work.
Statistics certainly don't go into the neighborhood that I've represented for the last 14 years.
What are the boundaries of your neighborhood?
I represent Central and West Harlem. Starting at the southern part of the district, 116th Street and 5th Avenue, going over to Morningside. And as you go further uptown from 135th Street, if you will, river to river, 145th Street, river to river. And as you get up to the west part.
Why do they cut a district that's 135th river to river, and then it makes 145th river to river? Why don't they go over to 150th and so on?
Well, then I might be impacting. Each assembly district is supposed to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 135, 140,000 persons.
Who vote alike.
Well, not necessarily.
That's not, but I'm talking about gerrymandering.
I understand that, yes. And for the most part, I've been very fortunate because I've been elected 7 terms, which is 14 years, and I'm glad some of these people vote alike. But if I were to go up a little farther, I'd impact upon my neighbor to the north, a guy by the name of Herman Denny Farrell, who is the chair of the State Democratic Party, and those of us in politics don't want to impact too much upon him.
That's exactly the way it is. Okay, well, tell us about the problems. But I think it's very important for audiences to understand exactly what geographical area a person represents.
Sure, absolutely. And one of the big issues going on in Harlem is the lack of truly affordable housing. You know, I often say to folks in Harlem, you know, white folks are not coming up to Harlem simply because they like us so much. It's because they are affected by the lack of affordable housing as well. And it's not a problem just affecting Harlem. It's a problem affecting the whole city. I'm actually very lucky. I live in the exact same apartment, the exact same rent-stabilized apartment that I grew up in on 135th Street. And my landlord actually hates me because I pay $900 for a 3-bedroom apartment.
Which would normally be $4,000.
At the very least. But, you know, the lack of affordable housing is probably part of is going to become the new civil rights movement, if you will, in the city of New York.
Okay, now what's the legislature going to do? What are some of the plans?
Well, you know, we grappled with this problem, I believe, in 1997. Whereupon we were talking about rent control, rent stabilization. What we did back then, we said that any apartment that goes over the cost of $2,000 would not be subjected to rent control, rent stabilization. Now,
is that a good idea?
We thought it was at the time.
Why?
Because not many apartments were going for over $2,000 at that point. Right. But lo and behold, landlords played a trick on us. What landlords did, every apartment that became vacant, they started renovating these apartments, and then they were getting over $2,000 for these apartments. So what's happened is that a lot of apartments were subjected to what's called vacancy decontrol, which means that the landlord could establish whatever price he or she wanted to establish. Now,
after making renovations.
After making the renovations to these apartments.
Well, many of these old apartments probably needed renovation.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But certainly, I mean, these are some great renovations that some of these apartments have gone through. I mean, when you have people paying, average $500, $600, I mean, you're putting in a lot of good renovations. And what's happening is that a lot of our senior citizens cannot afford these apartments. So people are being priced out of neighborhoods. What also is happening is that we're going through what's called a neighborhood destabilization. Neighborhoods such as Chelsea, Chinatown, Soho, Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, Harlem and such. We're all neighborhoods. And what's going on is that we're going through a neighborhood destabilization because people that were a part of building up these neighborhoods cannot afford to live there anymore. But these are questions that the new administration will have to handle.
What do you think should be done?
Well, what I think we should do in the state legislature, because the question is going to come before us,
Right.
what we should do is raise the cap, raise the $2,000 cap. Certainly, because I mean, I've never met a landlord that says you're paying me too much money. So I think that we in the legislature should raise the cap from the $2,000 limit that it is currently.
What would you suggest, $3,000?
Well, we have to look at it at least $3,000, at least, and we have to look at what apartments can be put under the vacancy decontrol program. So we have some very serious and some very real work that will impact the lives of everyday folks.
Now, the housing is a push-pull issue. In the 70s, many of the landlords left because of the cost of the taxes and the cost of keeping the building up, and the rent wasn't keeping up. So then we had different programs where the city put the buildings up for $1 so developers could come in and supposedly include a certain number of low-income people. I imagine as an assembly person, this brings about a lot of conundrums in terms of how do you really balance out the issues? How do you approach this as a
Well, it is interesting. And back in the 70s, especially in the neighborhoods such as Harlem, landlords abandoned their properties, whereupon the city became the largest single landowner in Harlem. The city of New York owned at least 80% of the properties in Harlem. Progress, I guess, in a lot of ways, is a double-edged sword. There was a concerted movement among elected officials, various business folks. I remember when Percy Sutton first decided to redevelop the Apollo Theater back in the early 1980s, and that became the engine of the new so-called economic renaissance, which started in Harlem.
When you say economic renaissance, what are the manifestations of that?
Well, I don't know. I do remember back in the early 70s when 125th Street was kind of dormant, economically speaking. There was a lot of stores that were closed. There wasn't a lot of money being spent on 125th Street, our main business corridor. In Harlem, where money is supposed to be flowing. Commerce is supposed to be freewheeling, if you will. And then Percy Sutton decided to open up the Apollo Theater, which of course was the engine that got it all started again. But with the city of New York becoming the main landlord, the city of New York has never been known to be a great housing property manager. And so and there were some programs to jumpstart the abandoned housing and such. Maybe some folks could get brownstones for $1 or what have you. But then again, they didn't give you any money to renovate it or develop it. So it's a lot of folks, a lot of the properties stayed the way that they were. However, during the Giuliani administration, got out of the housing business and gave all of the housing stock to friends of his, if you will. And that's why, I mean, that's the short version of why we have Harlem looking the way it is looking right now.
So what do you think should be done other than the cap
certainly
on the
I
rent?
think what I'm going to try and do is to protect the folks, the indigenous folks of the Harlem community, and try and make sure that those folks that have suffered under the bad times, if you will be able to thrive under the good times and be able to get into some of this new housing. You know, I'm chair of the Harlem Community Development Corporation, and we have built hundreds of units of housing. And one of our priorities is to make sure that that folks that actually live in Harlem can get first pick of these new developments that we build. One of the biggest controversies also is that we're trying to build a hotel on 125th Street at the old Lowe's Victoria, and we've been sandbagged, if you will, by the Pataki administration. So I cannot wait for this governor to leave so that hopefully we can get some better cooperation from the new chief executive of the state of New York.
Now, the other two key issues, we talked about housing. It's always education and health care. Let's talk about education, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity suit that says that the state should provide $5.6 billion more. And now I understand that the governor-elect, or the candidate, Spitzer, is waffling on that, saying that the state shouldn't put up all the money, the city should put up some of it. The mayor is saying the state should put up all of it. What happens? I know you, as an individual assembly person, can't make this decision, and probably the leadership.
We're part of the process.
Yeah, we talk about it.
Well, I don't care where the money comes from, as far as I'm concerned. As the father of two children, I want to make sure that my children are in fact educated, and that's a big problem. Every day I see parents taking their kids to school and such, and if you put together how much a kid in the New York City public school system gets, a kid in the city public school system gets about $5,000 to $7,000 a year. You go out to Long Island, a kid in Long Island in the suburbs gets about $12,000 per year.
Almost double.
Almost double. And a kid up in upstate New York gets about $15,000 a year. So I don't care where the money came.
From the state.
From the state.
Now, of course, in the Board of Education department, they have a $16 billion budget.
Right.
But much of that comes from the federal government, and a certain percentage of it comes from the city, and the state share, about 34%, is the one that we want to increase.
That's right.
But the decision is not written so that the state must do it.
Right.
The state might have to get into a negotiation with the city and ask the city to up its ante. And Mayor Bloomberg and many advocates saying the city shouldn't have to pay this, that it really should be the state. It's almost like reparations, paying us back for the fact that you changed us for such a long period of time.
That's right.
How do you think this might work?
Well, there's always going to be conflict between any mayor and any governor. And now I think presumptive Governor Eliot Spitzer has already stated that he wants, I think, $1 billion out of the city of New York.
And Bloomberg
is saying, no, this is not our responsibility. And I think what's going to have to happen is that we're going to have to go through some compromises here between the state and the city, because the kids should not be used as political footballs.
That's very, very clear. In the final analysis with this settlement, it probably means that the state's going to have to raise taxes. And that's always an issue, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. How do you approach that?
Well, and I think you're probably right. You're probably right. Taxes are used to fund programs, to fund education, to fund health care, to fund our security forces, if you will, police, fire, our emergency services. That's what folks really don't understand. And more than likely, we'll quite possibly have to raise taxes.
What kind of taxes? Property tax, income tax?
Well, I don't know. Certainly,
transportation tax?
The new governor, Spitzer, has said that he will not raise any property taxes, and he's going to make sure that folks that own their homes are going to have to, that will get some relief.
But that's political rhetoric. If you need the money, you're not going to raise property taxes. That means you probably have to increase income taxes or some other kind of tax.
Kind of way.
Capital gains taxes.
Absolutely. Some kind of way we need to get the money from somewhere. And where that is, I don't know.
But see, if you talk about this, and this is very real politics, if you talk about capital gains, the wealthy people don't use the public schools, say, why are you hitting me?
Absolutely.
We're going to leave the state. And it's always that push-pull.
That's right.
That if you raise taxes too much, people leave the state. My personal opinion is they won't leave. But I think that's what they say.
No, absolutely. And those folks that do, in fact, make those decisions have to make a political calculation, if you will. Certainly those folks, when you're talking about property taxes, those folks that own their own homes and such, we're not talking about a lot of the folks that live in the city of New York. We're talking about folks in the suburbs or in upstate New York. And Elliot Spitzer's already said he's not going to raise property taxes, and he's going to redefine the formula of how property taxes are in fact calculated. And he's going to look at how Medicaid, because Medicaid is over a third of the state budget. So, you know, we're here to give everyone a chance on how to recalculate.
Well, not give everyone a chance, give you a chance, because you're an elected official.
No, absolutely.
And you have to.
Well, and the burden falls on us too.
How will you go about making some of these decisions?
Oh, well, listen, the governor, the new governor, will present his budget in January. Whereupon we have about 2 months to go through his budget, to see what we like, to see what we don't like, and we will vote on a budget by April 1. I'm hopeful that we could get an on-time budget. We've had an on-time budget the last 2 years. The first time we've had it 2 years in a row in the last 24 years, if you will. So we will examine the budget. I mean, that's really how a governor makes his or her statement. They're saying what their priorities are, where the money should go. We have a $110 billion budget in the state of New York.
And clearly your role as an assemblyman is to work with your colleagues in doing this analysis and coming up with the plan, what you approve of, what you disapprove of, what changes you want to make.
That's right.
And that's why Assemblyman Keith Wright from Harlem is such a good assemblyman. Thanks, Keith, for giving us an insight into the politics of New York State.
My pleasure. Thank you.